To say that the PS4 consists of exclusives that are nothing but narrative-driven games with generic third-person shooting is actually quite accurate, but consider that perspective challenge. This year we have God of War, Monster Hunter World, and Shadow of the Colossus being PS4 exclusives that are about killing giants. Well, except for Monster Hunter World, which will eventually come into PC this October, but I can't take any chances of garbage PC ports at medium settings, so I will stick to my PS4 for this one. At least it works. Anyway, I just recently bought these 3 games, and including God of War, after relentless praise from pretty much everyone who played it. I'm never a big fan of God of War. I only played the second game, and while I loved that game and I replayed it twice, it's not to the point where I'm interested in the sequels. I know the story, but I haven't played the game. So then time for the reboot, and it's actually quite enjoyable. I'm 1 hour and 30 minutes in, and the biggest problem that I have with the game is the freaking camera. It would have been so much better if I can actually see where the enemies are coming from, and the indicator is about as useful as my Wi-Fi when streaming 1080p 60 FPS. But the game does let Kratos to move around quite freely, albeit doing so requires quite a ridiculous amount of button combinations. The original God of War certainly doesn't need a dedicated sprint button as far as I know. It requires a lot of time to get used to with the new control scheme, but once you know how to pull it off, it becomes quite enjoyable. Anyway, here's a Polygon article that talks about the maturity of the new God of War. And unlike any other Polygon articles that I've read which are stupidly entertaining, this article is quite boring actually. It basically talks about the most basic reasons in why the game is mature. The first game has gratuitous sex and violence for the sake of gratuitous sex and violence, and the reboot is exploring more complex themes of fatherhood. A lot of it consists of interviews from the people who work in the game. If I want to focus on the things that the writer said, there's really nothing much. It's just the writer saying, hey, God of War is a mature game because it tackles the themes of fatherhood and it makes Kratos to be more like a three-dimensional sympathetic character. And even I have to agree with the writer at one point. Kratos' sex minigame is pretty dumb. You cannot gamify sex. Not even games focused on being sex games can gamify sex. You only have QTEs. Press X to sex. Maybe we can find a time where sex games have evolved into a point where the only way to play is if we make a cardboard sex doll or literally shove the Joy-Cons up our asses. Seriously, Jet, what is wrong with you? The reboot God of War replaced this with press square to dad, so definitely more mature and respectable. And I also agree that mothers are quite absent in big budget games. I guess it's because being a mommy's boy just doesn't sound manly. The consequences of the toxic environment of this male-dominated industry. The God of War series tends to feel like it's working hard to look and feel mature, and the latest game is a fascinating snapshot of what mature seems to be for 2018. If we refuse to let go of the characters we loved as children or teenagers, at least in some cases, they eventually grow up with us. And this is true. We have seen how superheroes who used to be just dumb, mindless fun into something deeper and more mature. Except Deadpool, he's still just dumb, mindless fun. In a lot of ways, the reboot God of War reminds me of Logan. And I love Logan because the story is excellent and it's more focused in Logan's maturity rather than the typical X-Men fluff, which the movie does have, but it's not the main meat. And God of War is in a lot of ways moving into that direction, with Kratos lecturing Atreus for pretty much a lot of things in the game and saying boy so many times. Overall, this article is quite boring. Nothing too controversial is being said that is worthy of entertainment value. The same thing cannot be said to the next one. God of War has finally grown up. Starts off pretty well with that title. God of War has finally grown up. Now you can be like Polygon and just talk about how the game tackles more complex themes rather than just be gratuitous for the sake of being gratuitous. Or you can also talk about your own personal experiences with the game and subsequently embarrass yourself in front of many people, which is what this article does. So let's get reading. My most enduring memory of the previous God of War games is an uncomfortable university gaming session wherein I sat amongst a group of men watching a half-naked Aphrodite seduce Kratos. Even though you are no longer the God of War, she purred, crawling across her bed toward him, you can still share my bed. My most enduring memory. Oh, we're off to a good start. I've been trying to integrate myself into the gaming club for some time, posting on the group's forums and attending club activities after classes. The others weren't unfriendly, and at least one other woman had managed to establish herself in the group, but there was still a constant feeling of being on the outer that I couldn't quite shake. Yes, I know that the people in this club accepted me with open arms and they are certainly not unfriendly, but I still have this weird feeling that I'm not welcome in this club. Goodness gracious, this is starting to sound like a more pathetic version of gamers.
Aphrodite riff atop of the mattress. Do you know how long it's been since a real man has come into my chambers? She pouted, rising to her knees.
I'm sorry. The way you talk about this entire thing sounds like someone who is jealous that they didn't get to have sex with Kratos. I know that isn't your intention. I know that isn't your argument. But please, just double check what you're writing and think for a second. Has it ever occurred to you that you are complaining that Kratos have sex in a video game? Have you ever stopped and think, does this make me look like a person who is jealous that a video game character gets to have sex? And I don't? Seriously, proofread this and try not to make yourself look like an idiot next time.
The reviews for God of War 3 had been complimentary across the board. It was the latest big thing, a well-executed, highly anticipated release in a much-loved franchise. If your opinions of the game were worth listening to at all, God of War 3 could do no wrong. I looked around me at the men with their eyes intently fixed on the screen. Now, I ask you again, Kratos, will you stay?
That was at the moment where you can either choose to bone Aphrodite or not bone Aphrodite. The sex minigame in God of War has always been really freaking stupid and downright cringy. You get red orbs, sure, but it was still pretty freaking stupid. By the way, I'm actually quite shocked that YouTube allows tits on the website because the scene was on YouTube and you can clearly see Aphrodite's bare freaking tits straight up. Warning, it's not safe for work.
God of War 3 was, in many ways, a good game, and I have fond memories of the series. The combat felt powerful and fluid, the puzzles engaging, and that it was a satisfying experience. But for me, the great gameplay was wrapped in hostility towards the player, the hyper-masculinity...
Stop. Hostility towards the player. Hostility towards the player. How? How is that sex scene hostile to the players? I mean, sure, it's stupid, dumb, and cringy, but how is it hostile? It's like 1%, 5% of the game at best. It is the most insignificant part of the game. The game mostly deals with Kratos' journey into facing Zeus and destroying the entire universe in the process. And from what I've seen in the game and other people's opinions of it, I think the God of War trilogy is suffering from the Pirates of the Caribbean syndrome. Great first entry with 2 sequels that just faff around and other entries that everyone forgot that they even exist. I personally wouldn't be concerned about the immaturity of sex and violence or the treatment of women. I would be more concerned in how Kratos massacred an entire universe in a third game for revenge on Zeus? Let's just say that he's not exactly a sympathetic person in the last 3 games, and I also wouldn't call him a hero.
I couldn't connect with the depiction of Kratos as a hero. In one scene, he'd be protecting a young girl. The next, hauling terrified women around and quite literally using them as objects, discarding them to gruesome fates once they were no longer useful.
That's an incredibly arbitrary and specific reason in why you couldn't connect to Kratos as a hero. And that is assuming that you actually want to connect to Kratos as a hero, which he very clearly isn't. And if you're familiar with Greek mythology in general, you might soon find out that actually everyone is an asshole to one unreasonable degree after another. I cannot connect to Kratos as a hero because he's not a hero. He's a murderous, destructive psychopath with a sense of empathy similar to that of a hungry tiger. In other words, he's a character in a Greek mythology, and Greek mythology is not exactly the same as they were portrayed in the Disney films.
Women relentlessly threw themselves at him, yet he was completely unappealing. Whatever nameless, bare-breasted women squealed and pleaded with Kratos to either bed her or leave her unharmed, I felt pushed further away. The zeitgeist of games at the time was, perhaps unintentionally but no less effectively, inhospitable to those outside the stereotypical gamer paradigm. I liked the game, it just didn't like me.
You're well aware that the sex scene wasn't a huge part of the story, right? You're well aware that Kratos has much bigger problems to deal with other than his treatment of women. If you are pushed away from this game because of that one very small sex scene, maybe you are right. Maybe gaming is not for you. Maybe the gaming place is inhospitable to those outside of the stereotypical gamer paradigm. And you know what? That's great. Because gaming right now is for people who are interested in gaming, rather than people who are forced to be interested in gaming and had to write articles to give themselves a pat in the back. Oh, games are mature now, so my job still have some credibility among my peers who are going to write more important things like politics.
The new God of War released 8 years after God of War 3. When I first heard Kratos would be returning, I wondered how his particular brand of boobs and bloodshed would fit into today's more socially conscious world. After all, weren't these defining characteristics of the character in the franchise?
Bloodshed? Sure. Boobies? Not so much.
However, Kratos has returned to a changed man. Violence still defines him, but he is self-aware enough to know what he has done and what it has done to him, and he's
Yeah, we get it. God of War is more mature because it tackles the themes of fatherhood, and this is where the writer goes freaking bananas.
Kratos is thus portrayed not as the pinnacle of virile masculine perfection, but as a deeply flawed figure trying to learn from his past actions and ensure he never repeats them. And, just like the girl who doesn't know she's beautiful in One Direction's 2011 hit song What Makes You Beautiful, him thinking he isn't an inspirational figure transforms him into one.
What the hell did I just read? Did you just compare Kratos to One Direction? That is one of the most bizarre comparisons that I have ever read. What are you doing, writer? What are you doing? Why do you love to embarrass yourself so much?
Games such as Uncharted: The Lost Legacy and Horizon Zero Dawn are broadening the roles of women in games, but perhaps more subtly, the roles for men are evolving as well. There is growing room for men to have complex emotions, to fight for things other than glory, vengeance, and self-interest.
But men in video games have fought for things other than glory, vengeance, and self-interest. What video games have you played? What kind of cave have you been living in?
Historically, masculinity in games have been characterized by ripped, aggressive men killing everything in their path. Women may swoon or try to seduce them. They are powerful, commanding, and know exactly what they are doing at all times.
In other words, women love manly men. Your contribution to our human knowledge is greatly appreciated.
In contrast, Kratos, while still muscle-bound and capable of cutting a swath through his enemies, is plagued with uncertainty and fear. Rather than battling corrupt authorities or rescuing kidnapped loved ones, his biggest concern is raising his son and keeping him safe.
So it's perfectly fine to have buff and masculine men who kill everything in their path, as long as there's fear, uncertainty, concerned motivations, and a loved one that they're trying to protect. Isn't that the characteristics of every video game male protagonist ever made ever? I don't know why your standards have to stop in battling corrupt authorities or rescuing kidnapped loved ones. Is it because they're cliched? You don't really explain it. The rest of the article just talks about how awesome Kratos and his son Atreus' relationship is, so I'm gonna skip over into the good bits.
God of War demonstrates that men do not need to give up their power fantasies. They can still be the strong, muscle-bound figures of their dreams, fight grueling battles, and conquering swarming enemies. But to be truly strong, one needs to understand why they act, and know when and how to use their strength.
The most depressing part of this paragraph is that you're writing this on the mindset that men don't have a soul, or any sorts of empathy.
God of War is more secure in its masculinity, and it's no longer afraid of emotional complexity.
What the hell are you even talking about?
Kratos has fought many fearsome enemies throughout his storied history, gods and monsters and men, but by far, his mightiest display of strength and power is his hard-fought command over himself and his own rage. After all, what's more formidable opponent could Kratos ever face than Kratos himself?
Well, at least I end this article with an agreement. Kratos is certainly the enemy of himself. So when are we going to visit his palace?